As Lisa mentioned, we have another tight schedule today, so to better respond to as many questions as possible, please type them into the chat and the staff will do their best to get to them. Alternatively, feel free to email those questions to us. Also, just as a reminder, as with the previous 3 modules, we are recording this session, so we ask that you please keep your microphones muted during the presentations. Here's the agenda for Module 4. As you can see, today is all about providing example reviews, which will tie together the material that we had covered in the previous modules. There are a total of 5 design examples, followed by some closing remarks. So let's get started with example 1. This is an example of a plan review. You don't have to follow this exact way. This will be a plan review that covers everything from start to finish. And you'll see some examples later where that isn't the case. The goals of this presentation are the same as the goals of any review. We're going to review the site plans and stormwater management report, and we're going to identify any errors with the design. So first thing you have to ask is this project a major development? So does it trigger the municipality's stormwater control ordinance? Or in this case, actually the residential site improvement standards? Does it disturb more than 1 acre? And in the past, the question was, does the development increase impervious coverage by 1/4 acre or more? However, under the new rule effective on March 2nd of this year, the question is, does the development increase regulated impervious surface or regulated motor vehicle surface by 1/4 acre or more? Even if the 1/4 acre major development trigger isn't in your municipality's ordinance, remember the 1/4 acre increase in motor vehicle surface is also the trigger for when water quality is required. So this municipality did adopt a slightly different definition of a major development than what is mandated in the MS4 permit. They included the 1 acre of disturbance, but they also include anything that creates more than 10,000 square feet of new impervious surface. So that's just about a 1/4 acre. It looks like they decided to use round numbers, but both are the triggers for major development in this municipality. The next step would be to familiarize ourselves with the site so we can determine if it's a major development, and if so, which requirements would apply. So we would look at the existing land cover, and a trickier question on some sites, although it won't matter on this site, is has that land cover existed for the past 5 years? Because if you look into the rule or the SCL, it will require use of the land cover with the lowest runoff potential that existed from the last 5 years if the area had more than 1 land cover in that 5-year period. In this case, we don't have that situation, but you can run into that situation where the site has been recently developed. So this is the pre-developed site in this case. We can see that it's mostly wooded. There are 2 cleared spots in the center of the site that appear to have some sort of roadway or right-of-way for a utility heading through it. And this is what the engineer submitted with the stormwater management report. For the existing coverage, there is 19.71 acres of woods and 0.95 acres of open space. And for this project, we could assume that this is correct. You could go out and check this. If you look at the site in GIS, you could measure those areas, but this information seems correct compared to the site plan, and it doesn't signal out as requiring further checking. For the proposed conditions, there's going to be 5.5 acres of road, roof, and driveway, and 8.25 acres of open space, 6.91 acres of woods. So they're disturbing a pretty good portion of the site, but they aren't getting rid of all the woods. This is the site plan. It's a residential development. They're constructing homes, roadway, and 2 buildings in the center of the property. Also in the center is their stormwater management basin, which is an infiltration type basin, shown in yellow. Based on the plans, there are 13.5 acres of disturbance. Therefore, by any definition, no matter which municipality you're in, this is a major development. There's also an increase in impervious area by 5.5 acres. So it's definitely major development because it exceeds the acre disturbance and also creates more than 10,000 square feet impervious surface. Let's talk about which standards are required in this case. Water quantity is definitely required since it's required for all major developments. The only potential exemption would be if discharging into a tidal flood hazard area. And this is not in a tidal flood hazard area at all, so it would not qualify for that exemption. Water quality, we saw there is a 5.5 acre increase in impervious surface. That's over the quarter acre, or in this case, the 10,000 square foot of impervious surface that triggers water quality. This project was reviewed under the rules effective before March 2nd of this year, so the water quality is based on that increase in impervious surface. However, under the amended rules effective March 2nd, it would be motor vehicle surface that you would look at, or regulated motor vehicle surface. And if you look at the site plan, it definitely has an increase of motor vehicle surface greater than a quarter acre, so water quality would still be required. Groundwater recharge, this is in planning area 1, but since it isn't previously developed, it does not qualify for the exemption. We saw in the existing condition site plan that the site is roughly 95% woods. Yes, you can make an argument that the small area in the center is exempt, but ultimately that area isn't going to make a significant difference in the calcs. So it's not previously developed and not exempt from groundwater recharge. Also, under the new rules, this site would have to meet these design and performance standards using green infrastructure. As we said before, they are constructing an infiltration basin. The infiltration area is only the 6,000 square foot area at the very bottom that's highlighted in orange. The rest of the infiltration basin in the lower portion is grass, and the upper portion extending back is remaining as woods. So in the case of the 100-year storm event, runoff filling the basin is going to reach into the wooded area and use that area as detention. So under the old rules, it was okay to use a large-scale infiltration basin like this to meet the water quality, quantity, and groundwater recharge standards. However, under the amended rules, GI BMPs from Table 5-1 are required to be incorporated to meet the water quality and groundwater recharge standards. So the small-scale infiltration basin listed in Table 5-1 has a contributory drainage area limitation of 2.5 acres, and the infiltration basin proposed here has a contributory drainage area of 5.5 acres. So therefore, it is not a small-scale infiltration basin from Table 5.1. Instead, it will be an infiltration basin from Table 5.2, which will need a variance or waiver in order to be used to meet the water quality and groundwater recharge standards. So in this case, an option might have been to incorporate into the design multiple small-scale infiltration basins, each with a contributory drainage area less than or equal to 2.5 acres. And the areas highlighted in green are just to note some possible locations as an option for some of those small-scale infiltration basins. So next we'll look at the stormwater management measures they're using. I like to see if the basins are acceptable before we can go on and review all the calculations, just to find out that the basin isn't good anyway. So in that case, they would have to redo all the calcs, and then you just have to re-review. So for the basin, there's only a 6,000 square foot infiltration area. And with the 6,000 square foot infiltration area, according to Chapter 12, they would have to do 2 soil profile pits in the infiltration area of the basin. What was actually provided was only 1 soil profile pit in the infiltration area of the basin. But they did complete an additional 4 soil profile pits that were very near the basin, just surrounding it. That probably comes down to them performing the soil testing before they found the exact location where the basin was going to be. But that doesn't really meet the standard. So it depends on the situation, of course. You have to use some judgment in these cases, but you have to look at the soil profile pits to see if it's worth asking them to do more. Are all 5 soil profile pits really similar? So in that case, you can probably accept them. Or is there a wide variation, in which case you would really have to push them to do more testing in the basin. The other thing they have to do is determine permeability in the soil. In this case, they used undisturbed 2 permeameter tests, which are acceptable tests to use in determining soil permeability. But keep in mind, if you're going to use 2 permeameter tests, they need to be undisturbed samples that were collected, because disturbed samples don't really meet the standard. So this is a detail of the basin. It shows the ground elevation at the bottom of the basin, water quality design storm, 210 100-year storm elevations. and it shows where they estimated the seasonal high water table to be. So keeping in mind, infiltration basin needs to have 2 foot of separation from the seasonal high water table, but that 2 feet of separation needs to be measured from the bottom of the sand layer. So the sand layer has to be 6 inches, and so really from the ground elevation that you would walk on if you were in the basin, it's really 2.5 feet of separation from the seasonal high water table. And that's exactly what they're showing on this detail, and so that's great. But we really need to check the soil logs to determine if the seasonal high water table is actually at elevation 9.5. Okay, like I said, there's 5 test pits, 1 in the basin, 4 outside the basin. This is test pit number 1 inside the basin. This test pit basically shows sand throughout, but down to the layer between 39 inches and 60 inches, you start to see some modeling, which is great because that's an indication of the seasonal high water table. You can see up at the top of this that the tests were done in May. So this actually would be a problem if they were trying to use direct observation because it's just outside the wet time of year, which is January through April. Now, we might be able to have a discussion because it is just outside that period, depending on how wet of a year it was. But fortunately, we don't need to go down that road because we do see modeling here. They noted down at the bottom that modeling was down to elevation 9.5, so that's where they've established the seasonal high water table. Also on the right-hand side, you can see that they collected an undisturbed sample at 24 inches deep. So keeping in mind that the sample that they collect and test needs to be in the most hydraulically restrictive layer that is above the seasonal high water table, it seems the sample is at an acceptable depth. There's a sand layer, then a loamy sand layer, and they took the sample from the more restrictive loamy sand layer. This is test pit number 2. Looking at it, it's pretty similar to the first one. You have sand, then loamy sand, and then start to see some modeling. They took their sample in the loamy sand to sandy loam layer, which again appears to be the most hydraulically restrictive layer, so that's good. And we can see here that the modeling happens in this one actually a little deeper than the previous one. It's at an elevation of 9 rather than 9.5. Test pit 3, also similar. Seasonal high at 9.5 again. Test pit 4, kind of the same thing. Seasonal high comes out to 9.4. And test pit 5 again looking very similar. So when you're asking whether or not we could accept this with only 1 soil profile pit in the basin, like I said, the 4 others were very near the basin, and their results look very similar to the profile pit, or to the profile of the test pit that was within the basin. I'd say it's no problem to just accept these, even though they were outside the basin. We have plenty of evidence here to show that the water table is low enough to not interfere with the basin, or at least to have that 2 foot separation. So this is a summary of all the seasonal high water table elevations that we saw in the various test pits. The highest of these is at 9.5, which is exactly what they put on the detailed drawing and is exactly what's required to have that 2 foot separation. So I agree with what they put as the seasonal high water table. It seems like the basin has the right separation. Here's the detail again, so you could see, yeah, they put the elevation down as 9.5, which has the right separation. So the other question we need to answer is, with the soil testing, does it have the right permeability? This is an example of the results from a 2 permeameter test. Probably seen this before, but almost everyone I've seen looks exactly like this. Important to note on here is you can see this is from test pit 3, and we can also see that it was an undisturbed sample that was used, and then the results are at the bottom, which show that the tested permeability is 6.54 inches per hour. And here's the infiltration rate summary. I'm not going to go through every one like I did with the test pits, but here are the results. We see that in 4 of the 5 test pits, there are no problems with the infiltration rates that they got. But actually in test pit number 2, for some reason, we got much lower infiltration rates. Actually too low for an infiltration basin. Let's take a look at test pit 2. It looks like that the sample was taken from the layer outlined in red, which is the brownish yellow loamy sand to sandy loam. I wouldn't have necessarily expected it to be so much lower than the other loamy sand to sandy loam layers. That's what the results were. So at this point, there would really be two choices that the design engineer had: either send him or her out there to do a bunch more testing and prove that this was just an anomaly, or the thing they did choose to do, which is to replace that sand layer completely from the infiltration area of the basin. So they replaced down to the bottom of that layer throughout the entire infiltration area of the basin with K4 sand. So at that point, we know that infiltration rates are good enough and we don't have an issue. Next thing to look at is the drain time. So basin has a 6-inch orifice at 13.2 feet. Bottom of the basin is at a 12-foot elevation, so ponding depth is 1.2 feet. The infiltration rate, they conservatively just used 1 inch per hour, and the drain time would be 14.4 hours. So that's far less than the 72 hours, so it's not going to be an issue. But worth noting is that they will really, if they really follow all of the standards in the BMP manual on designing an infiltration basin, the max depth of the water quality design storm is 2 feet. And the minimum infiltration rate in the field is 1 inch per hour, which means that it's a design rate of half an inch per hour, and you can't actually have a drain time that exceeds 72 hours with those values. So if you meet all those standards, this calculation is kind of pointless in most cases. But what is important is that we need to look at the groundwater mounding analysis to determine how quickly the basin really will drain. And we'll look at that in a few slides. So from there, let's move on to water quality quickly. So we already established that the basin is going to get the 80% TSS removal. Right, it's an infiltration basin, and we determined it meets the BMP manual at the time of this review anyway. So it gets 80% TSS removal. So all we really need to do is determine that all the areas that they have to treat are routed to the basin. So if we look at the plans, we see that the areas they need to treat are actually directed to the basin, keeping in mind that we make people treat all the areas that cars drive on for water quality. Wouldn't necessarily make them treat runoff from rooftops. They might be sending that to the basin anyway, but we wouldn't force them to. So this is the site again, and what we can see here is that the roads are all curbed and collected, and they flow towards the inlets that bring runoff to the basin. There are trench drains at the bottom, so basically there is no way that the runoff from the road surface or driveways can leave the site without going to the basin. So it looks like they meet water quality. So summarizing the infiltration, we saw that the basin has 2 foot of separation. We saw the infiltration rate is okay, mostly since they were doing the soil replacement below it. We saw the max water depth was 1.2 feet, so that's less than the 2 foot maximum allowed. Water quality design storm was 12.5 feet, which meets the which means the depth was only 6 inches, which is less than the 2 foot required. Why is the orifice at 13.2? If the water quality design storm elevation is only at 12.5, and the answer is probably they are infiltrating the difference in the 2-year storm for recharge. So that's probably why there's the higher elevation there. Of course, the drain time we just looked at is less than 72 hours, and we'll check that next with the mounding analysis. So here's the water quality summary. If there are trench drains capturing runoff at the lowest point on both sides of the site and everything else is piped to the basin, all runoff will go to the basin, and it's going to get that 80% TSS, so they meet water quality. So this is the groundwater mounding analysis they submitted. They used the groundwater mounding spreadsheet that uses the hand-tush equation. I hope you're all familiar with this after Tuesday's presentations. You're going to see that 2 feet of separation from an infiltration basin, especially one that is even moderately large, is generally not enough separation for the basin to be able to drain in 72 hours. Maybe in certain cases where the soil is extremely sandy and you have like 20 inch per hour infiltration rate, it could be okay. But in a lot of situations for infiltration in the 2 to 3 inch per hour range, 2 feet of separation is just not enough for the basin to drain in 72 hours. So they have pretty good infiltration rates here, especially with the soil replacement. But let's go through what they did. So it looks like 2.2 feet per day as the recharge rate. They used 0.26 for specific yield, which is on the high side. We recommend 0.15. Horizontal conductivity, 22, which is 10 times the vertical conductivity. So this was done a while ago, and both of those values were acceptable at the time. Today, we would accept a max of 0.2 for specific yield and about 5 times the vertical hydraulic conductivity, and that's in the coastal plain, lower if outside the coastal plain. Next are the dimensions of the basins. Keep in mind, when using the spreadsheet, you use half X direction, half Y direction, not the full basin length and width. Duration of infiltration, they put 1.2 days. Initial thickness of the saturated zone, they use 30 feet. So the initial thickness of the saturated zone is one of the hardest parameters really to figure out. 30 feet is on the conservative side, so probably okay. Reality people try to say it's in the Cohansey Aquifer and it's 600 feet deep. But we're talking about a reaction between a stormwater management basin and a deeper aquifer. And in most cases, there will not be hundreds of feet of depth. In most cases, there will be some sort of restriction between the bottom of the basin and the deeper aquifer. So yes, maybe if you're talking about the water supply perspective of things, you can argue that the aquifer is that deep. But when we're talking about interaction with the stormwater management basin, and that's happening in 1 to 3 days, that's not realistic because it's not going to pass through the restrictive layer so fast. This really should be the depth from the seasonal high water table down to the first restrictive layer below that. So if they use 30 feet, 20, 10 feet, that's probably a decent guess unless they have evidence to suggest otherwise. But if they want to use some higher value, they would need to go out there and prove that. So making them do some sort of continuous boring down to the depth that they're trying to use, and must be continuous boring as not to miss a small restrictive layer, and prove that there are actually no restrictions. So the results showed a groundwater mound height of 7.67 feet, and while they only had 2 foot of separation from the seasonal high water table, and groundwater mound of 7.67 feet is going to extend into the basin. So that's an unrealistic result, but that basically means that in this 1 to 2 day time period, this basin is not going to drain. So let's make some modifications to see if this basin will drain within the 72-hour period. Now, so here's a closer look at the results. Shown in the light brown color is the bottom area of the basin, along with the elevation of the seasonal high water table. The basin surface and bottom of the 6-inch sand layer. Take note that I think your notes may show the surface at 3 feet above the x-axis when it really should be 2.5 feet. So the calculations show the groundwater mounding is going to impact the basin. With the 1.2 days that they entered in the input section, this basin will not drain. So there's 2 choices: either 1, redesign the basin, or 2, try to figure out a better answer. So the DEP made some modifications to what they put in there. Keep in mind, we are trying to find out, does this basin drain within 72 hours after the rainfall event ends? And they use 1.2 days, and we care if it drains in 3 days after the rain event stops. So the infiltration period was changed to 3 days. And because you do that, you also have to change the recharge rate to maintain the proportionality. Lisa had previously shown us how to calculate the duration of infiltration period. The horizontal hydraulic conductivity is the same because the vertical gradient does not really affect the horizontal rate. So when we rerun it like this, the groundwater mound is 2.44 feet. This is 72 hours after the infiltration period begins. So at that time, the groundwater mound height will be 2.44 feet. Because this is an infiltration basin, it has the 2 foot separation from the bottom of the sand layer and then the 6-inch sand layer above that. So there actually will be no ponding on the surface of the basin at this time. it will be just in the sand layer. And the sand layer will be saturated, but that's okay. So that seems to be, it seems like it's probably going to work. After we confirm that the basin, water quality, groundwater mounding analysis are okay, we are going to want to look at the water quantity control analysis. This is their chart. You'll notice there is some runoff coming from off-site onto the site, and the way that they're handling that is they're taking the pre-developed on-site peak runoff rate, applying a reduction factor just to those, and then adding the off-site back into that to calculate what the total allowable is. And to me, that the calculation makes sense. So what do we need to check? They use the NRCS method. First thing to check is, are those numbers in those tables what the results of the calculation show? Did it calculate pervious and impervious areas separately? Is the rainfall depth correct? Distribution right? Is the time of concentration correct? Do the land covers and hydrologic soil groups actually match the field? Did they use the right unit hydrograph? Does the Basin Model match the plan? This has been a few times where the model doesn't actually match the plans. Another big one, did they include infiltration in the routing? So back when this site was reviewed, our BMP manual did not allow exfiltration to be included for the 210 and 100-year storm routings. And under the new rule, exfiltration is allowed for some BMPs. However, in the case of large-scale infiltration basins, exfiltration is still not allowed. So the first thing I did was look at some of the calculations. This is the 100-year hydrograph for the entire site. It shows that's 34.67 CFS, and like we saw on the table, the 100-year total was 34.7, so that's pretty much the same. That gives me a good indication already that the table matches the calculations. You don't necessarily have to check every single number, because if some of these are right, chances are the rest are also correct since they are just running the model again and again. Next, did they calculate pervious and impervious surfaces separately? For me, the easiest way to see this would be to look at the subcatchment diagram, and you can actually just see on there, are they separated or not? One thing to be aware of, certain programs, say HydroCAD, for example, allow you to check a box in the settings that will calculate pervious and impervious separately, even though they are both inputs to the same subcatchment. That's technically okay because it will produce the right volume, but you have to be careful if you're doing that because when you're using the same subcatchment, it allows you to only input one TC. And the only case where you should let someone do that is where the TC for both pervious and impervious are the same, which is kind of a rare situation. Or where TC doesn't matter, like if it's drained to a lake on site, and the TC doesn't really make much of a difference. In this case, this is the diagram of the model they used. We can see that they have broken into 3 areas. The impervious surfaces are directly connected to the basin, other impervious surface and pervious surface. So they definitely separated it out here. We can see that very easily just by looking at this without looking at the calculation. All right, so if we look into the calculations, we see, did they use the correct rainfall depths and distribution? Well, they used the type 3 rainfall distribution, which was okay at the time of this review, but now, of course, the NOAA C or D distributions are required, as Lisa mentioned in the calc presentation in Module 2. In this case, the site is in Atlantic County, so NOAA C would have had to been used, but for when this was reviewed, they used 3.3, 5.2, and 8.9 inches for the 210 and 100-year storms, respectively. So this is the chart for all the various counties, and those numbers pretty much match up with what is here in the chart. So it seems like that's where they got them. They could have also gone to NOAA's website, which has more accurate rainfall data for the exact site, and that's preferred. But either one is technically acceptable. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is the time of concentration. So TC is another thing where it might not be necessary to look at every single one, but might choose a handful and see if they're right. And if you start seeing mistakes, then you can go into them more deep. This is one for existing conditions. They used 100 feet for sheet flow, woods light underbrush with a Manning's N of 0.4. It's good. All of those things match up. The the max Manning's N you could use is 0.4, 100 feet for sheet flow. The slope is 3%, seems reasonable for the area. You can also measure that from the plans to double check. But let's see. But here the TC came out to 23.5 minutes, so that seems okay. Proposed assumed TC was 6 minutes for all the impervious surfaces. Again, this is another deviation from the current rule, but acceptable at the time of the review. There's no longer a minimum or default value for TC. Using the NRCS method, TC must be calculated. That's for both the pre and post condition. So next thing to check is if the land coverage and the hydrologic soil groups match the field conditions. First thing to ask is, what are the hydrologic soil groups? You should definitely have a soil survey that they provided to you. If not, you can look it up online. One thing to keep in mind, though, is if you're looking at a situation where there is no HSG, or maybe it says something like on-site investigation is required because the material is fill, then you really need to make them do the investigation on site. You can't just accept an assumption like if it's urban land, then it must be HSGD. That's not true at all. It really depends on where the fill came from. That influences what kind of HSG that fill ends up having. If they don't want to do the testing, there is another option. They can use a conservative estimate. So if you're in the coastal plain, you could use an HSGA for existing condition, HSGD for proposed. And if you're outside the coastal plain, you could use HSGB for existing and D for proposed. And that's very conservative, and it's going to make the basin really big. But you can accept that. That's in our Chapter 12. But usually on-site testing is done. So this is the soil survey map for the site. The pink area is HSGB. The green is AD. And the gray is an unknown HSG. So let's see what they used in the calcs. This is from their report. For woods, they used a CN of 30 or CN of 55, which is good. That means they used either HSGA or B. For open space, they used a CN of 39 or 61, also good because that's HSGA or B for open space. And they did the same thing down in proposed conditions. So it seems like CNs that they used pretty much match up with what we saw from the soil survey. One thing to note is that there was that one area of unknown HSG, and that ultimately doesn't come into play for this site because it was in the bottom left corner of the site, which wasn't being developed at all since there were freshwater wetlands existing there. And no, this is for water quality, but under the new rule, the road and driveway would be considered regulated motor vehicle surface, while roof would be considered regulated impervious surface. The next thing to check is if they use the right unit hydrograph. Well, it's in the coastal plain. They use the Delmarva, so already that's acceptable to me. Using the Delmarva is more conservative. And the only time I would accept someone not using the Delmarva in the coastal plain is if the site was completely paved already, or the watershed has slopes exceeding 10 or 20%, really steep slopes. In those rare cases, they could make the argument that the Delmarva unit hydrograph is maybe not applicable to their site. Otherwise, in the vast majority of sites in the coastal plain, you should be making them use the Delmarva unit hydrograph in the coastal plain. The question we get a lot is, can the Delmarva unit hydrograph be used in the proposed conditions, right? Because the reasons we use the Delmarva is that the site is relatively undisturbed, it's flat, it's interacting with sandy soils, undulating topography that lowers the flow. Right, those things are gone in the proposed conditions, but if ultimately just discharging into a basin, it doesn't make much of a difference because the basin is sized for volume, and the volume for both hydrographs, both the SES and Delmarva, will come out to be the same. The one time it does matter is if they're sizing something based on peak flow rate, like an MTD. So you should definitely not let them or let someone use the Delmarva unit hydrograph when sizing an MTD. The next thing to check is if the basin model actually matches what's on the site plans. So this is the outlet control structure in the Basin Model. Device 1 is the outlet from it, so that's not really relevant. Device number 2 is the inlet at 13.2 feet, and it's a 6-inch orifice, which is good. They also have a weir at elevation 14 feet and a grate and a broad crested weir, and so that must be the emergency spillway at elevation 14.8. So let's take a look at the detail of the outlet structure. They've got an E-type grate at 14. They have a 6-inch orifice, so that's good. It matches. But on here it says that the orifice is at elevation 13.36, which is actually 0.16 feet higher than what was shown in the model. So that's a problem. It's not a huge problem because it's not a significant difference, but it's definitely a difference that's going to have to be accounted for before this is given final approval. Most likely what happened is they probably raised this up for groundwater recharge reasons and forgot to update the part of the model because groundwater recharge doesn't really play into that. So we're just going to have to make them fix the model to show that everything still works with this orifice being slightly higher. Okay, the next thing that we're going to check is if the shape and the volume of the basin match what they are actually going to construct. This is from the Stormwater Management Report. It shows the elevation versus surface area for the different levels or increments of the basin from an elevation of 12 to 16 feet. So I'll check 1 or 2 of these to see if they're correct, and if they are, I'll assume the others are also correct. So we'll check the first one. The bottom of the basin is roughly 180 by 200 feet, so that's 36,000 square feet. Of course, the basin is not really exact, perfect rectangle, so it might not be right on, but it should be somewhere around 36,000 square feet. And if we look back at this, we see that the basin bottom is 36,430 square feet, so that's actually pretty close, even closer than I expect. So that's good, seems right. Let's just jump ahead to the highest elevation at 16. And so it's nowhere near a rectangle at all, but it's roughly 480 feet by 200 feet, which comes out to 96,000 square feet. And I expect it to be a bit off, but somewhere in that general vicinity. And they had 97,505 square feet, so that's actually pretty close. So just from those quick checks, it seems like the basin was input into the model correctly. The next thing we want to check is if they used infiltration in the model. Generally, when you see infiltration, it is going to show up as infiltration or exfiltration. Sometimes I've seen custom outlets or discarded flow. It is usually shown in the outlet structure information. We can see here that there's nothing like that, so they're not using infiltration in this case, and that's good. Under both the old rule and the new rule, large-scale infiltration basins should not include exfiltration in the routing calcs. So summarizing water quantity control, everything looks pretty good except for that discrepancy with the height of the outlet structure. So they're going to have to fix that, rerun the model, and send it back. But it seems like unless it produces some sort of significant error, which I doubt, since it's such a small change, that water quantity is going to be okay. Next thing we want to check is groundwater recharge. In this case, the engineer opted to infiltrate the difference in the 2-year storm. So keeping in mind, you can use groundwater recharge spreadsheet, or you can infiltrate the difference in the 2-year storm, either acceptable. They calculated the existing 2-year runoff volume to be around 41,000 cubic feet, and the proposed to be around 100,000 cubic feet. So the difference there is around 59,000 cubic feet, and the volume below their lowest outlet is just around that volume. That's why they probably raised the outlet control structure for groundwater recharge reasons. Because this barely meets groundwater recharge, they probably just bumped it up to like 0.16 feet to make the recharge work. This is all okay at the time of review under the old rule, but under the amended rule, the BMP would require a variance or waiver from the GI standard in order to be used to meet the groundwater recharge standard, since it's a large-scale infiltration basin from Table 5.2. So if groundwater recharge is going to be good, then you have to check the maintenance plan. Make sure they have one, first of all. Make sure it has a responsible party. In this case, they listed the developer as the responsible party, which is okay, but not ideal. The developer is not going to be around after this development is done. So make sure to note to follow up with them later to revise this and put down a homeowners association or whatever the ultimate responsible party will be, because it's not likely to be the developer in the future. They have preventative maintenance tasks and schedules. That's good. They have the required cost estimates, blank maintenance logs, and keep in mind that it needs to be recorded on a deed where the maintenance needs to occur. So as long as they did all that, everything is good with the maintenance plan. So in summary, the BMP design is good with that soil replacement. Maintenance manual was good. Water quantity control was good as long as they make that change to the outlet control structure. And as for water quality and groundwater recharge, under the old rule, when this was reviewed, it would have been met. But under the amended rule, they would need a variance from NJAC 7.8-5.3 in order to use a large-scale infiltration basin to meet the stormwater runoff quality and groundwater recharge. Also, the stormwater management measure location and description will need to be recorded on the deed notice. So that's going through a whole review, and there will be a few other examples of stormwater reviews today. That's basically what today's dedicated to. So thank you for your attention. Should you wish to contact me, here is my information. And I'll turn it over to Changi with plan review example 2.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm going to going over a second example. This project that I'm going to present that was reviewed by the township under the old rules. But as Anthony said, that we are going to also review it under the new rules, in the context of the new rules, to see what would happen if we reviewed under the new rules. And you always, that when you review the project, you always want to review the site plan, the report, and also identify any errors with the design. And then you may want to suggest that the potential solutions to overcome those errors. So we're always asking whether this project that is a major development. So you have to look at what the SCO says, and whether the SCO only mention that define the major development only as 1 acre disturbance or more, or the SCO also include the impervious coverage. And as I said, that this project was coming before the new rule, so that the SCO in the ordinance was still only have the 1 disturbance and also the a 1/4 acre of impervious surface. And so if the township now that adopt the new ordinance to match our new stormwater management rules, and they wish to include the impervious surface in their trigger in the definition of major development, they would have include the creation of 1 acre, 1/4 acre or more of regulated impervious surface, and also the creation of 1 acre or more of the regulated motor vehicle surface. Those language there in our model ordinance. So that project came in for the review, and then as we said, we want to check whether the project is a major under the township's stormwater control ordinance. So as I just mentioned, that the ordinance including not only the disturbance, but also including the impervious coverage. So that is important to look at what was the existing land cover. And as we mentioned many times in the rule, said that you have to look at the land cover in the past 5 years and see which land cover is the most have the least potential to generate runoff. And here's the site plan. You don't see that much the difference. And here's the aerial photo of the site from 2012 when the project was submitted for the township review. And you can see that there's no building on the right-hand side, upper corner of the right-hand side. But if we one slide back to the site plan that the existing plan that attached in the site plans, that shows that there was a building on the up right corner, and also has some impervious surface on the upper portion of the property. So, but why in 2012 there's nothing? So we look back to the aerial photo in 2007 and found that there was some impervious surface above the parking lot and also a building on the upper right corner of the site. And the reason they won't show in the later 2012 aerial photo, there was the site, the buildings, and those impervious surface were removed in 2007, and some vegetation is established between 2007 and 2012. So here we just want to emphasize that you have to verify the hydraulic condition that exists on the site for at least 5 years and see what's there. And we have mentioned many times that the removed impervious surface before the application coming for the township review cannot be credited for the pre-construction condition. So look at the comparison of the 2007 and 2012 aerial photo. You can see that when this project came in 2012, there's a lot of vegetated area, and that is not consistent with what they shows in the existing site plan. They call the survey plan, but it's not shows the real condition on the site. And what does that mean? The difference of the impervious surface showing the different years and whether they can be credited for the pre-construction condition, and what they mean, and the effect to the stormwater management. And you can see here there's a number comparison, and you can see that in 2000, if that the site, the pre-construction condition was based on 2007. There was only 5,000 square feet of long area and a lot of impervious surface, or we can say that a lot of the motor vehicle surface. And if based on the aerial photo in 2012, when the buildings and has been removed, you can see that the long area has been is a great portion of the site. So when those 2 years of the land cover compare with the proposed coverage, you can see the difference. And I want to clarify the number. One number in the proposed coverage, it was 41 thousand square feet. It should be 36,500 square feet. So if we compare that based on the 2007 condition when the building was still there, the impervious coverage was not changed, and the time of concentration probably was maintained. So they don't have to do the. So when they use the option 1 in the water quantity design and performance standard, they probably can meet the standard because the post-construction hydrograph does not exceed the pre-construction hydrograph. And so the water quantity, they can say they don't have to do anything that would have been met. And for the water quality, because there was no trigger of the, there's no increase of a quarter of impervious surface under the old rules. So there's no water quality treatment required. And since there's no increase of impervious surface and the land cover the long area was not changed much. So they probably don't need any groundwater recharge. So for this side, it was just like nothing they have to do. If you compare on the side, the proposed condition with the condition in 2012, when the building has been removed for many years and the land cover the vegetation has been established on the site, you can see that the impervious surface was increased by more than a quarter acre. And under the context of the amended rules, that would have more than a quarter acre of motor vehicle service. So the time of concentration was decreased because it's smooth area service. And so they would have more, the peak flow rate would be greater and they cannot maintain the same hydrograph. So they have to choose the other option that you have to reduce the peak flow rate to 50%, 75%, and 80% to meet the water quantity requirement. And since they have more motor vehicle service, so under the new rules, they would have to meet the water quality requirement, and also the groundwater recharge would have to be required. So if review this project under the current the current rules or the SCO that adapted to our current rules, those two areas circled by the blue lines, that would be those areas that has the new motor vehicle service. They were subject to 80% TSS removal rate, and they have to do water quantity and recharge too. So how they meet the requirements? So they can have like a small scale GIBMP, like a small scale bioretention basin installed on the parking lot. And then they have the detention component that can be designed within the small scale bioretention basin to meet the quantity requirements. And for the roof runoff, they don't have to do water quality treatment. And then for the parking area, the area overlap with the existing paving motor vehicle service, they only have to maintain the existing water quality treatment or 50%. And they may also choose to use the underground subsurface infiltration basin instead of the bioretention basin. It's all subject to the design engineer's the choice. But as under the current rules, they have to use GIBMPs to meet those requirements unless they receive a waiver or variance from the GI standards. So here's kind of like a conceptual plan showing that they could have the stormwater islands that being concrete. They can put that put small rain garden, or we say the small scale bioretention basin to replace those concrete curb, and have some small area that would have the bioretention basin on the corner of the site that can treat the water quality. So that is the example tool I presented. Should you have any question, you can contact me. The next one will be presented by Lisa Schaefer.
Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Okay, so in the third example that we have for you, there's some overlap with the previous examples. I'm going to focus on additional information rather than repeat same types of analysis. So of course, like any other presentation in this module, we're going to look at the site plans, the stormwater reports, everything else, the soil logs, and we'll identify errors with the design, and then maybe suggest some potential solutions towards the end of the presentation. So obviously you're going to figure out what standards apply and then check them for compliance. Obviously the pre-construction conditions set the stage, so it's important to get everything right. And in this site, we have 1.5 acres that consists of light woody vegetation along the property lines, and the property itself is surrounded by commercial and residential uses. There's also a church along the property and the western boundary, which is to the upper left edge of the page. In the existing condition, our stormwater flows towards all of the property lines, basically away from a high point in the center of the site. Now, the design engineer, in this case, evaluated 3 points of analyses from 3 drainage areas, and those are to the south, which is to the left edge of the page, east, which is to the bottom, and the neighboring properties to the west. The web soil survey indicated that the entire site consisted of hydrologic group D type soils, so we would expect not much infiltration would be available to take place on site. So now the project was approved under the older version of the rules, and I will do my best to discuss how the most recent approvals would also apply to the project were it to come in today. For the existing coverage, we had approximately 258 square feet of concrete driveway and over 66,000 square feet of lawn area. But the site really should have been evaluated further because it didn't accurately depict that a portion of the site was lightly wooded. So this missing consideration results in a miscalculation for the existing condition, and it actually would generate more stormwater than is actually occurring in the existing condition, and that in turn makes it easier for a design engineer to say he or she is meeting the rule requirements in terms of reductions. But what we have to realize is that our proposed coverage contains about 37,000 square feet of impervious cover and 29,000 square feet of lawn area. Of course, under the rule amendments, motor vehicle surfaces would have to be separated from the roof areas so that we could accurately depict the site in terms of the rule requirements. Now, our development consists of the construction of a 3-story apartment building that covers about 1.4 acres with parking areas and associated site improvements. Now, the site proposed a bioretention basin with underdrain to provide stormwater runoff quantity control for the roof-generated runoff. And that basin is in the blue oval at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. This basin discharges to the MS4 system that is in the road, Mercer Street. Okay. The pink oval is the portion of the parking lot that discharges to the south without any treatment for water quality or quantity control. And the gray oval in the upper right corner is the proposed sand filter with under drain. This system discharges to a pipe such that the outflow from that converges with that from the bioretention system, all going towards the connection here in Mercer Street. So of course, we're going to check the SCO to find out the municipality's triggers. Is there more than an acre of disturbance on site? Yes. Does the site discharge into a tidal water body? No. So we know that right off the bat, water quantity control is required. Is there more than a quarter acre increase in regulated motor vehicle surface? Yes. So water quality is required. Now, is the site a previously developed area within an urban redevelopment area? No. So groundwater recharge is required. And lastly, if an infiltration BMP were proposed, we would obviously have to check the groundwater mounding analysis. But of course, both of the BMPs here are under drained, so the mounding analysis is not required. But something that's very important to note is that throughout the stormwater management report, there was no discussion of non-structural strategies, which was an issue under the old rules that had to be addressed at the front of the design phase. And under the new rules, the designer must use green infrastructure to comply with the rule requirements unless there's a municipal mitigation plan, but in this case, there is not one. So we'll have to see if any of the proposed BMPs could be used to meet the GI design performance standards. But I will say, of course, that a sand filter with under drain is not considered green infrastructure. All right, we want to examine our soil logs. This is very important, and we want to make sure that the seasonal high water table clearance is adequate. And if there was a permeability issue, we would want to identify that up front. Now, right off the bat, we see that the tests were done outside of the January to April months for direct observation. In fact, they were done in December, but we are relying on modeling, so I'll accept these results. And this particular soil log was taken approximately in the middle of the basin. And what's odd is that, let's see, the existing elevation was 49.25 feet, and the proposed bottom of the basin is at 45.5 feet. So the seasonal high water table was 2.5 feet below existing elevation. That puts it at 46.75. Well, that would be above the bottom of our proposed basin. So that means that the designer knew that this basin could have 1.25 feet of groundwater in it, during seasonal high times of year. So we may have potential draining or flooding issues. Now, I don't have the information on how many other test pits were conducted, but just like the other examples, you would be checking to make sure that the location of them met the standards of Chapter 12. All right, so let's look and see what was actually in the report and how it does or does not meet the quantity control standard. This was a narrative taken directly from the report. So the project is looking to meet the runoff quantity control standard based on the second method found at subchapter 5.6 of 7:8. Now, up front, this method requires a full analysis that analyzes the impacts of existing land uses and projected land uses, assuming full development under the existing zoning and land use ordinances in the drainage area. But this was not provided in any way, so that means that the design right off the bat has not met the runoff quantity control requirements of the rules. So that being said, let's look and see, let's take a look at some of the calculations to see what else they proposed would suffice. In the existing condition, you have your flow rates for the east, west, and south drainage areas, so they're appropriately named. And so the proposed condition, DA1 flows from both basins, remember they combine, and goes towards the east, which is where that street was at the bottom of the page. DA2 flows to the south before entering the existing stormwater system there. And so the development will definitely have some reduction inflows coming off the site, but these don't meet the runoff quantity control requirements, nor would they meet the requirements of the third option, which makes a new development reduce post-construction peak runoff rates for the 2, 10, and 100-year to be 50, 75, and 80% respectively of the peak runoff rates. And so that was not an option in the report, but I'm trying to see if maybe we could approve it under that method. All right. In fact, the stormwater management report stated they have eliminated any trace of stormwater from existing drainage area west from flowing to the neighbor's property as it did in the existing condition, and that the existing drainage area east enters the stormwater system in Mercer Street, as does DA1 East. And well, the other problem that we have is that drainage area south enters the stormwater system, as does DA2, but under option 2, the calculations must demonstrate that there's no increase in the peak runoff rates for stormwater leaving the site for the 2, 10, and 100-year storm events. And yeah, we see some reductions, but the other part of this option is to check that there are no increases in flood damage caused by increases in volume, as well as any changes in timing. And also that the analysis is supposed to include full development, but none of this information was in the report, so they do not demonstrate compliance. And in fact, like I said earlier, if we were to review this under option 3 instead, we see that only the 100-year storm achieves the required peak flow reduction. So even in that case, I can't say that they comply with the reduction requirements. The next thing we're going to check is just accuracy of the peak flow calculations. And this is just one image that was taken from the report. And it's based on averaged curve numbers. So in module 2, I showed the impacts of averaging, and that will definitely underreport the amount of runoff generated. Now, I'm only going to show one, but this was done for every instance. So the peak flow calculations definitely are put into question, and I would ask them to be revised. So let's move on to groundwater recharge. And well, basically with this one, we have to confirm that the soils mapped on the site were correct, and the information is applied correctly in the calculations. Now, the report stated that the NRCS survey identified the site with D-soils, and that the soil test pits were performed in the vicinity of each stormwater management basin. So yes, indeed, this site is entirely covered with D-soils, and we saw that we have primarily clay from the soil logs. So that would definitely restrict groundwater recharge. However, the report should have included the groundwater recharge spreadsheet demonstrating that the soil classification alone produced a 0 deficit. So if you see that there is no recharge occurring in the existing conditions, the spreadsheet would demonstrate the same for the proposed condition. That is, a statement won't suffice. The recharge spreadsheet as the proof is what would be needed. All right, so let's move on to water quality. So in order to meet water quality, they're proposing a sand filter with under drain to treat runoff from the proposed parking area. Now, a sand filter that is built to the specifications set forth in the B&P manual merits a TSS removal rate of 80%. Now, we see from the grading plans shown here that some of the proposed regulated motor vehicle surface that must be treated is indeed conveyed to our sand filter with under drain up here, but approximately 6,500 square feet leaves the site without any treatment for water quality. And since this is a new regulated motor vehicle surface, unless there was some other water quality treatment elsewhere within the drainage area as allowed by a municipal mitigation plan, which there was not, well, they're not treating it. So this development does not comply with the water quality requirement. So also take note that if any of the roof runoff had commingled with the parking lot runoff, then that additional runoff would have to be treated for water quality. As such, the roof runoff is all going here, so there is no treatment that is required. All right, so now let's take a look. We know that the site, the grading, and the stormwater management facilities have to be redesigned, but I'm going to look at the details just to see if anything else is missing. Now, the detail that you see on your screen is for the sand filter, but first off, it's mislabeled as an infiltration basin, so that could certainly be an issue, say for the review engineer or even the maintenance contractor. It certainly definitely indicates something is strange is going on. And let's, delve a little bit deeper to see what else we can find out. All right, so remember that I had said that the seasonal high water table was 2.5 feet below the surface, which was at 46.75 feet in elevation. So something's not right with this detail. In fact, there must be a minimum separation of 1 foot for a sand filter with an under drain. But this BMP is to be constructed by excavating below the seasonal high water table elevation. And clearly the design engineer knew about this because they proposed a geomembrane liner that was due to the encroachment on the water table. So that is a deviation from the BMP manual design and standards criteria. So the engineer also used a permeability rate for the sand bed that's higher than the maximum allowable in the BMP manual, and that value is 2 inches per hour. And additionally, the drain time shown in the table is 44.8 hours for the 100-year storm, whereas the maximum allowable design drain time is 36 hours when you're using the maximum sand bed permeability of 2 inches per hour. So furthermore, with the under drain, the pipe network has to be shown to not be the control, but I don't have any of that information. So these are additional issues of non-compliance. Also, the sand filter here was designed with a 12-inch sand bed. A sand filter must have a minimum thickness of 18 inches. And we're also missing a specification for the type of sand being used in the detail or in the plans or anywhere. If the specific sand is not shown on the plans, we cannot say that the design is adequate. So the BMP manual requires AASHTO M6 or ASTM C33 sand. This could not be found on the plans. Additionally, all sand filters are required to have an intermediary stone choker course 1 to 2 inches in thickness, and that must meet the specifications for clean, coarse aggregate in accordance with AASHTO 57, and that's not in the design, so that is yet another deviation. Finally, the BMP manual also requires the perforated pipe network be contained within a gravel layer. Now, this is the under drain that they are proposing. There's no gravel layer, so that conflicts with the design requirements. Yet, interestingly enough, the maintenance plan shows your standard sand filter with a gravel layer and an 18-inch thick sand bed. So something was going wrong or amiss, and we would have to verify, in fact, what if that was just, an oversight by whoever did the detail sheet, or what is going on. But we would have to definitely verify that everything was in order and make sure that it matched with the maintenance plan for the project. So we also know that sand filters are required to have some type of pre-treatment, but on the left is the detail that was provided. The engineer stated that a B inlet with a snout was provided for this purpose. Now, a manhole of some type in front of a BMP that requires a forebay is not an adequate substitution for that forebay, so that's another deviation from the BMP manual. Sure, the BMP manual details what we would consider adequate pre-treatment, and instead of a forebay, you can use other BMPs in the manual, but you must follow all of the design criteria in that chapter, including the maintenance. And I've just inserted that text to the right here. So we do not have this yet again. So we're really striking out. So far we've seen that the quantity and quality don't meet the requirements. Fortunately, the proposed design does not rely on infiltration, so there's no need for them to provide a groundwater mounding analysis. But also, the design does not meet the standard for green infrastructure. The sand filter has an underdrain that's not listed in the rules as being green infrastructure. In fact, this type of BMP is now covered in Chapter 11.4. And why isn't it green infrastructure? Well, it doesn't allow the stormwater to infiltrate nor interact with the soil, nor be stored for reuse. So if we had replaced the sand filter with underdrain, say with a bioretention system, then maybe that could have been used to meet the GI design standards. So this is what the site looks like under normal conditions. So that is not a sand filter with underdrain that is functioning properly. And so this was a short example, but it shows you that a lot of the design components, you do have to look at them to make sure that everything is in order. I think that's about all I have. I don't see any questions on this example. So how are we doing for time, Mr. Moderator?
See. Like,
Can we address all the other questions?
yeah, we can address a few questions.
All right. Are there any left that the others haven't addressed? Otherwise, Tim is up next with example 4. So, Changyi, how are we doing?
Yeah, I guess we still have a lot of time. If you want to take a break or you want to continue, that's fine.
Yeah, we had scheduled a break at this time, so I figured probably everybody wants to get up and stretch for a minute or two. So, let's see, what time is it? It's 2:18. Can we, what do you think? 2:20, 2:21? What do you think, Chang? Is that good? 3-minute break?
Yeah, 5 minutes break. Yeah, it's
5-minute
fine.
break. Okay. Everybody be back at 2:23.
Okay, hopefully everyone's back from break by now. Get started on example 4. So in the example 4 presentation, I'm going to go over a couple of examples of errors that we commonly see. And these will be short examples. So the following projects were reviewed during our MS4 audits, and there are a few issues in each project that I'm going to address. So here are the details of the first project. The proposed development disturbed more than 1 acre and an increased area of motor vehicle impervious surface by more than 1/4 acre, and therefore requires water quantity treatment, water quality treatment, and groundwater recharge. However, the township exempted the project from the groundwater recharge requirement because the township thought that all major development projects in planning area 1 are exempt from the groundwater recharge requirement. So is the township correct? Let's take a look at the stormwater management rules, specifically the recharge exemption. It says groundwater recharge requirement does not apply to projects within the urban redevelopment area. And the urban redevelopment area is defined as previously developed portions of areas delineated on the state plan policy map as the Metropolitan Planning Area 1, designated centers, cores, or nodes. The key is that the site must be previously developed and part of an urban redevelopment area. If the site is not developed, or if the site had some structures in the past, but they have been removed and vegetation has been reestablished, it is not considered previously developed. Here's a tax map image of the site. The proposed development consists of 2 lots that are to be merged together. This aerial photo shows that the lot is currently a wooded area. From the tax record, you can see that there are no existing buildings on the wooded lot. Therefore, the site is not a previously developed area and cannot qualify for the urban redevelopment area exemption. So the township was wrong to issue that exemption in this case. Now let's get into the next example here. The second example is a major development that requires water quantity treatment, water quality treatment, and groundwater recharge. However, the design engineer claimed that the project is exempt from the groundwater recharge requirement because the project site is in planning area 1. So again, let's take a look at whether the project site is previously developed. The top aerial photo shows the pre-construction condition. The aerial photo on the bottom is the post-construction condition when the development had been finished. You can see in the existing condition image that the site was previously a driving range where most of the area had been developed except a piece of wooded area on the lower portion of the site. The wooded area is not considered a previously developed portion of the site, and it cannot be exempt from the groundwater recharge requirement. The triangular shaped basin on the right corner of the site is a standard constructed wetland with extended detention basin components. Just a note that standard constructed wetland is not a small scale green infrastructure BMP. It needs a waiver or variance from NJC 7:8-5.3 if it is to be used to meet the water quality requirements. A standard constructed wetland has a 90% TSS removal rate. It achieves this TSS removal by utilizing the wetland vegetation and a deep pool to slow the movement of water and settle out the solids. As previously stated, a BMP needs to meet the design criteria in order to receive the designated TSS removal rate. A standard constructed wetland requires pre-treatment on the inlet side of the basin. The basin needs a pre-treatment zone, semi-wet zone, high marsh zone, a low marsh zone, and a pool zone. Each zone provides a percentage of the total storage volume for the water quality design storm. Additionally, the minimum length to width ratio of a constructed wetland must be at least 1:1. As you can see, this triangular shaped basin will not meet the 1-to-1 ratio requirement. Also, one of the inlets to the basin is very close to the outlet. The 1-to-1 ratio is essential because the stormwater runoff that is directed to the wetland needs to have a path to contact with vegetation. If a basin is designed like this, with the inlet so close to the outlet, vegetation may not provide the full TSS removal, and therefore a 90% TSS removal rate cannot be assumed. Another issue is with this stormwater management report. The rainfall depth that the report shows for a 100-year storm, 7.5 inches, is too low. Both the NRCS's county average and NOAA's rainfall data show a much higher value for rainfall depth. Using 7.5 inches results in a 15.9% less estimated runoff volume or peak flow rate than using NOAA or NRCS's data. That is a significant amount. As a township reviewer, the engineer should be familiar with the typical rainfall depths that apply to the township. Another issue with this project is the maintenance manual. A 50-page maintenance manual was provided. However, there was no responsible party contact information provided, no constructed wetland specific preventative maintenance tasks, and no maintenance cost estimates were included. It is important to make sure that the maintenance manual for each project is specific to that project and that the same generic maintenance manual is not repeatedly used for all projects. And this final example will show another common mistake that we see. This project incorporates two separate basins. One is an existing infiltration basin at the top of the site, and the other one is a proposed basin on the right side of the site. The submitted stormwater management report and site plans have no information regarding the soil permeability or the depth and size of the existing infiltration basin. Therefore, it cannot be determined whether the existing infiltration basin is adequate in providing water quality treatment. Furthermore, the existing basin might not be designed in accordance with the design criteria of the current BMP map. An approval of an alternative stormwater management measure would need to be approved, would be needed for approval of this project. In accordance with the stormwater management rules, 7:8-5.2G, where the department is not the review agency, a copy of any approved alternative stormwater management measure, alternative removal rate, and/or alternative method to calculate the removal rate must be provided to the department. Additionally, alternative stormwater management measures may be used to satisfy the requirements at 7:8-5.3 only if the measures meet the definition of green infrastructure. Here is the soil testing location map. It is important to review the soil testing location map to check if the soil testing was performed in the infiltration area of the infiltration BMP. Also, the elevation information for the existing and proposed condition must be shown so that the excavation depth can be reviewed and a determination made on whether it is sufficient. From the soil profile log shown here, the excavation depth can be checked to see if it meets the requirement. The excavation depth must be 2 times the maximum water depth in the infiltration BMP, or 8 feet below the bottom of the BMP, whichever is greater. The excavation depth at this test pit is 176 inches from existing grade, therefore the depth is enough. Next, the seasonal high water table should be checked. Since it is an observation of the redoxomorphic features of the soil, it can't be done outside of the months of January to April. The seasonal high water table in this case is 96 inches from the ground level, and the bottom of the basin is 75.9 inches from ground. The difference is 20.1 inches or 1.68 feet. As required by the BMP manual, an infiltration basin needs at least 2 feet of separation from the seasonal high water table to the bottom of the basin. This basin has not been designed properly as it is too close to the seasonal high water table. Finally, as noted in the log, no soil permeability test was conducted. However, Chapter 12 of the BMP manual requires soil permeability tests be conducted on each test pit. Therefore, it does not meet the criteria of the BMP manual. Here's a log for the second test pit. Again, the excavation depth is checked first. As shown on the slide, the required depth of excavation is 147.6 inches from ground level. The log shows the excavation is down to 168 inches, therefore it's sufficient. The seasonal high water table is observed at 56 inches below ground level or at an elevation of 87.13 feet. The bottom of the basin is at an elevation of 88.5 feet. The separation is only 1.37 feet, which again is not acceptable. Next, the soil permeability test is checked. The seasonal high water table is 56 inches from ground level, and the bottom of the basin is 39.6 inches from ground level. Therefore, the soil permeability test must be done in the most restrictive soil layer between 39.6 inches and 52 inches. From the log, it shows that there are sandy loam soil and sandy soil in that depth range. Sandy loam is typically more restrictive than sand, so that should be the location where the soil permeability test or sample is taken. However, as indicated in the log, the permeability rate was tested in the sandy soil at a depth of 52 inches. Therefore, the soil permeability test was not performed correctly. This makes the soil permeability test result, 4.84 inches per hour, not usable, but the design engineer still used this value in the design of the infiltration basin. Some folks might think, what's the big deal if it's not that far off, or those minor errors won't affect the basin after it's built? We visited this site 3 days after a rain event. The basin had approximately 1 foot of standing water in it when it should have completely drained by this time, and wetland vegetation had been established in one end of the basin, indicating the prolonged presence of standing water. The small errors shown above resulted in a basin that does not function properly, is now mosquito breeding habitat, and that needs to be retrofitted to function as it should have been designed to. There are 2 other issues that were observed in the design of this basin. The basin was designed to have a 1.5% slope on the bottom. However, the BMP manual for infiltration basins requires the bottom to be level, no slope. The slope is one of the reasons that the basin has about 1 foot of standing water at one end and a soil bottom shown on the other end. The second issue is the sand layer. The soil required to be used for the sand layer must be K5 sand, but the design calls for K4 sand. This error was missed by the review engineer. Finally, a review of the maintenance manual shows that there were errors missed on that as well. This is the full extent of the maintenance information we could find from the submittals to the township. It's a block of text approximately 4 inches by 6 inches on a corner of a site plan. No information about the responsible party, no cost estimates, no details of maintenance tasks required, and no maintenance log requirements. In no way does this maintenance information comply with the requirements in the BMP manual. Remember that it is the township engineer's job to make sure that all aspects of the proposed project comply with the stormwater management rules and BMP manual. No assumption should ever be made that a project is designed correctly and does not need a thorough and complete review. Next up, we have Manesh, who will go through example 5.
All right, thanks, Tim. Just pulling it up now. All right, so hello again, everybody. Let's go through just one more example here before I hand it off for the final presentation of the day. Now you're going to hear a lot of the same concepts from the previous examples from the staff here, as well as the same things from the previous 3 days. So some of these things, they should not look brand new to you at this point in time. Just to note though, this project, it was reviewed under the stormwater management rules effective before the March 2nd, 2021 date. So therefore the definition of major development and the threshold of the water quality design and performance standard used by the municipalities, they're not updated to the amended rules that were effective March 2nd. So we are going to review this project in the context of the old rules, but also remind you of how it should be reviewed under the amended rules. So when you review a site plan, you want to make sure you understand the plans, the designs, any errors in the designs, and possible solutions to these issues. And these are just a few things that we're going to take a look at here in example 5. A few things to look at for when you begin reviewing projects. It's what's the trigger for the SCO you're dealing with in the town. As you know, there are different triggers per municipality for a major development. Are you disturbing 1 acre or more? Are you increasing regulated impervious coverage by a 1/4 acre or more? Are you increasing regulated motor vehicle coverage by a 1/4 acre or more, or maybe even some combination of the two? These are key things that you should be looking at when you're reviewing projects. At this point in time, a township, they shall have adopted a stormwater control ordinance that is consistent with these stormwater management rules effective on March 2nd of 2021. So as you see here, this is an example from a municipality and major development. It was defined similarly to the way the state defines it, that provided for ultimately disturbing 1 or more acres of land or would create a 1/4 acre or more of impervious surface. First, you shall check if the municipality uses only 1 acre of disturbance as the trigger for major development, or also have the increase of a 1/4 acre of impervious surface as a trigger. In this example, as you see here, the SCO, they use both. So again, just reiterating the same ideas from before, it's important to understand the pre-construction conditions. You want to know them because you want to know what the requirements are going to end up being. You want to know the existing land cover, and for a certain scenario, you may want to understand what the land cover has been for the past 5 years and making sure that the rule is being applied to the most pervious cover that was on that site at that time. The stormwater management rules require that if more than 1 land cover has existed on the site during the 5 years immediately prior to the time of application, the land cover with the lowest runoff potential, that's the one that shall be used. So let's take a look at the site plan depicting the existing condition. So on this site, it was said that it was completely paved. As you can see, there's a pool right in the middle of the site. However, it wasn't in use at the time. You can also see there were a few buildings that were in existence at the time that they were looking at developing the site. But this is what we got from an aerial photo. Most of the pavement, it was ripped up. It was dirt paths and parking lots, except by the pool. But by the time we got there, the impervious driveways weren't even there anymore. So in all, the site was dramatically different than what we had received in the plan. So looking further into the report, what we were provided was an existing coverage of 1.61 acres. The lawn, it was 0.52 acres, and then the proposed condition, they state they increase slightly less than a 1/4 acre of regulated impervious coverage. Now, this is key because increasing more than a 1/4 acre or more of regulated impervious coverage means you would have to meet the water quality requirements. They're at 0.22 acres of increase, so they're very close to the trigger for water quality, but they wouldn't need to meet the conditions for this requirement. So in the existing condition, what we settled with were these areas identified in red. To the right, where there used to be a parking lot, we identified that there still is a little bit of an asphalt pavement path going to where the pool is. Some of the area around the pool we considered impervious. Even with that, there was work in the meantime changing a few other things because the pool was taken out, and all this work was happening while they were planning to build. So then what ended up being proposed was a 3-story building, and if you identify around the property lines, a fairly big island in the parking area towards the right is where they are identifying their pervious areas. So based on the information that they had given us through the designs and reports, we understand the total disturbance is at 2.13 acres. So the increase in impervious areas is going to be slightly less than a quarter acre, as we discussed earlier. The local SCO states that to be considered a major development, it either has to disturb an acre or more of land or create a quarter acre or more of impervious surface. The project, it's going to meet that 1 acre or more of land disturbance condition and is therefore going to be considered a major development, even though it's not going to create more than a quarter acre of the impervious surface. So we know we're going to have to meet water quantity. Water quality didn't have to meet the increase in a quarter acre, so it's not going to be required. But let's talk real quick about groundwater recharge here. The area, it was a previously developed area. None of those areas I discussed established woody vegetation. There were no forested areas at all. So in essence, the whole entire site was developed. So it's going to meet the groundwater recharge exemption. But surprisingly, they provided it even though it wasn't even required. So we're going to take a look at that groundwater recharge in a bit. So what ended up getting developed was a little different than what was approved. Eventually, they added a proposed 1-story, and they lost a pretty big area they were considering pervious around the island, and they ended up putting an underground infiltration system. Under the new rules, using a subsurface infiltration basin for a drainage area less than 2.5 acres can be considered a small-scale GIBMP, as long as all the design criteria is met. One of those criteria is that the basin will need pretreatment of runoff to 80% TSS removal rate, but we didn't see one available to us with the plans for this project. Additionally, the roof runoff was commingled with the runoff from the parking lot, so the commingled runoff would have to be pretreated to 80% as well. If in a scenario they separate the roof runoff and direct it directly into the subsurface infiltration basin, it may just need a leaf screen to pretreat the roof runoff. These are just some design criteria you're going to have to consider. Back to the site plans though, as you can see, the building itself, it extended further to the left, so it got even bigger. So as they built, they increased their building size. And as a consequence of doing this, they got rid of areas they considered pervious areas. So now proposed pervious have now changed to impervious. So the proposed site is going to look different than what they originally planned. And they were already considered to be close to triggering water quality with just being under the quarter acre of impervious. So as you see here in this aerial image, there once was a piece of vegetated area, but now they decided to pave it over, and there's more impervious coverage now than they proposed originally, which would push them over the threshold for triggering water quality. So what does this mean for the site now? So with all this happening, they would need to meet the water quality standards, and they made an attempt at it, but it wasn't provided to an adequate degree. And they didn't really come close to 80% for TSS removal. The basin that was designed wasn't part of this presentation, but it was so poor that they didn't even meet what would have been allowable. Either way, though, whether adding more impervious was an accident or not, the site plans, they have to represent what is actually going to be built. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems like this. If this is reviewed under the SCO adopted to the amended rules, you will need to check if there is an increase in motor vehicle surface of a quarter acre or more, and you will exclude building roof from the quarter acre threshold. So now let's take a look at the groundwater recharge analysis that they provided, even though they didn't have to. As I said earlier, we talked about groundwater recharge, and because of the site being a previously developed area, they didn't have to provide it, but they gave it to us anyway for this infiltration BMP. But in the report, they didn't provide any soil testing data. They kind of just made up facts, actually. The urban land pontoon complex, they identified as a type C soil, but if you go on the NRCS website, it's not going to match up with that. Regardless, it's still a low permeability, and the site itself wasn't even identified with this correct soil. But they did propose an infiltration basin, and soil testing, it's required to be done regardless to figure out the seasonal high water table separation from the bottom of the basin and the permeability rate coming from there. Another added layer to this site was that there's a small stream that traversed the site via culvert that may or may not have been impacted by the construction of the infiltration basin. Nonetheless, though, the basin, even though it was not been seen as an issue yet, it's likely not to drain fast enough. And it's one of those things that we understand it's going to be a problem, but since it's underground, it's not really getting pushed to fixed. And that's something that should be worked on. Again, as you see here, they submitted a groundwater recharge spreadsheet identifying their land covers for pre and post-develop conditions. So they understand their post-development annual recharge deficit, which is surrounded in the blue box at the bottom of the page, which is at about 11,000 cubic feet. The basin, as you see in red, was built under the parking lot at the top of the page. They filled out the appropriate information, even though they didn't need to, but they provided that the basin was approximately 4,000 square feet in area, and we're going to get into more specifics on the individual information here. Now, there's a little bit of concern, though. There's differences, and it seems as though it was just based on the design over the change. One location, it's identified as almost 27,000 square feet that's going to the basin, while the stormwater report actually says it's about 24,000 square feet. And when you actually calculate it out, including the pervious, which doesn't have to be done for the groundwater recharge spreadsheet, it was actually closer to 26,000 square feet. So there was some discrepancy, but it wasn't anything of a major note. The BMP area at the end, they got it relatively correct, actually. They measured it from the site plan. Their infiltration volume, it had to be equal to their BMP area times effective depth. Effective depth being the maximum equivalent water depth that can be achieved in the BMP before overflow begins. So here they provided the effective depth as 2.4 inches. From the pond report, they have a 6-inch infiltration gap to allow for infiltration, which here you see the bottom of the basin is at 97 feet, and their first orifice out is at 97.5 feet at the very bottom. So when you get into whether they provide the correct effective depth, we are assuming they are using a 0.4, so 6 inches times 0.4 will get you 2.4. So it's allowable. Sometimes we prefer a justification or it being written out, but 0.4 is sometimes what we only see, actually. Here you have the bottom of the chamber at 97, the maximum infiltration elevation at 97.5 feet. And since this basin is underground, the ground surface elevation is going to be above it. And it ranges from 102 feet to 105 feet, depending on where you actually are at. So dBMPU is depth to the upper level of the BMP surface, and DEXC is the depth to the lower level of the BMP surface. So it's easier to do that when you are above ground, actually. When you're underground, it's going to become an inverse. So the dBMPU, when you're underground, it's going to be a much smaller number. So the dBMPU, it's 54 inches. So it's basically, it goes to that 6-inch infiltration orifice, and then you add the 6 inches for the DEXC. Then you're just confirming based on the maximum infiltration depth, which is 6 inches. Your land segment, is where the BMP is located on the site. So here, the BMP, it's underground and in an impervious area. So it doesn't affect how it'll work out, except they did use the wrong soil, which will lead to its own issues in the long run when you're looking at this project. Even though they didn't need to provide it, there were still some issues that we saw with the groundwater recharge, and they didn't do proper soil testing, even though they are proposing an infiltration basin, which is a big no-no. And the post-development conditions did not match the plans or reports or maintenance plan. They overestimated the amount of impervious area to the recharge BMP, and they didn't provide sufficient information to verify the effective depth. So these are just some things you need to keep in mind when looking at groundwater recharge analysis. Now let's check the water quantity. So water quantity, what needs to be reviewed, the time concentration, curve numbers, that the routings, if that they're appropriate, and the basin designs. They used a minimum time of concentration of 10 minutes, though they used the NRCS method and they didn't show any calculations, so they assumed the wrong way. Using an assumption for the pre-existing conditions, it's not allowed anymore for the NRCS methodology, and all calculations for the time of concentration must be shown as previously stated in many presentations before this now. So this isn't something new. So the curve numbers, they composited them and weighed them out. It did not have a dramatic effect based on calculations on how it should have been done because the curve number of the lawn area was relatively high. But still, nonetheless, it's not allowable. So this is a concern. These are bad habits right here. Here we are confirming they use good condition and 74 as their curve number value, but like I said previously, they use sea soils, and even though it was clear that sea soils were not there, so again, here's another mistake with soils, so you got to get the soils right. In their stormwater management report, they discussed that infiltration occurring with the basin has not been considered in the calculations to be conservative. However, as was said in the calculations presentation in Module 2, since this is a small-scale GIBMP, exfiltration can be used in the routings, but it must meet the conditions in Chapter 5 along with any pre-treatment. The proposed peak flows for the site were 47% for the 2-year, 63% for the 10-year, and 76% for the 100-year storm. They got close to the water quantity requirement, but with considerations from all the input errors in the project that you just saw, we cannot confirm that they met the requirements for water quantity. The person who reviewed this project, they deemed it not correct, and we had to deal with things after for that. So that is it for example 5 here. Here's my contact information. Now, I'll hand it over to Nancy for the final presentation unless there's any questions or clarifications that we need to go through, Changi or Lisa.
I think I want to clarify one two things. One is that the in module 1, I mentioned that there was a 5 years you have to the township has to adopt the stormwater control ordinance, which is not what I try to mean. I mean that the in the stormwater management rule, it is required that the township to review their stormwater management, municipal stormwater management plan whenever they re-examine the master plan. And it was in the past, it was like every 5 years they or 6 years they the township has to re-examine their municipal master plan. So that's why I said the 5 years is the township has to review their stormwater management, the municipal stormwater management plan every 5 years. So I don't mean that the municipality has to review or adopt their stormwater control ordinance every 5 years. But in fact, the township should adopt the stormwater control ordinance whenever there's a change in our stormwater management rules. And so that's the clarification I want to make.
All right, if that's all the clarifications, do we want to hand it over to Nancy?
I can take over. Well, I can't do my slides. Can somebody else do the slides as we work through it? And I'll have to apologize. There was a little bit of a mix-up and I didn't think I was going to be available, but now I am. So
Nancy, I can have it up in just a second.
all right, hold on.
1 second, I just have to share the screen. And
So how much time do I have so we can meet our time for today?
Nancy, you can take all the time you need. Actually, we're way ahead of schedule for today.
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, so we actually have time for more questions too. Can you see the full slide, Nancy?
Hold on. I need my notes and hold on. I'm sorry, it was just a little bit of a mix up about when I didn't think I was going to be free. Okay, I see your slides. I'll just, as I go through mine, let me just catch up. And please, anybody else jump in and correct me if I miss something or misstate something. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Nancy Kemple. I'm the section chief over the Bureau of Najipti's Stormwater. I'm sorry, I'm going to mess up our name because it changed recently. Stormwater Permitting and Water Quality Management. And we will just get started. So this is just a closing presentation that we're going to go over some other activities and programs that are going on in the stormwater permitting world in the department. So we have rule amendments that have been ongoing for other parts of the stormwater management rules that are in process. We have the MS4 permit renewal that we are working on now for the Tier A and B, although the permit doesn't expire until the end of 2022. It's such a long process that we had to start rather early. We also have some, our guidance document, the BMP manual, we're continuing to update various subchapters. We are, with the pandemic, we have revised our audit program over the last year, since we were not going out in the field and we've been doing a lot more of our audit program online. We'll also deal with maybe touch on some of those BMP manual updates and also a quick update and discussion on stormwater utilities. So the amendments to the stormwater management rules that we were covering throughout this course that were adopted on March 2nd, 2020, and had a 1-year delayed effective operative date, so they didn't become effective until this past March 2nd. Municipalities, as you know, had 1 year to update their stormwater control ordinance, or SCO. They were notified in writing and via email a number of times, and so almost all of the towns should have updated their SCOs by this March 2nd, 2021 deadline. There's one exemption for the towns in the Pinelands. There were some complications with the pandemic, and the Pinelands Commission needed to update the regulations in order to allow the towns to update their SCOs. So towns that are entirely in the Pinelands do have to wait for the Pinelands Commission to update the Pinelands CMP. Towns that are partially in the Pinelands should have updated the SCO that applied to the area of the town that is not in the Pinelands, and will also have to wait for the Pinelands Commission CMP amendments to amend the SCO for the portion of the town that is in the Pinelands. We also have an updated model SCO posted on our webpage, and although most towns, I know many towns are either complete with their adoption of their SCO or in the process, but if any towns have any questions, you can always look back at our model. We have a overview of the Tier A and B permit universe. Right now, we have 456 Tier A municipalities in the urbanized areas of the state or along the coast. The Tier B municipalities, right now we have 101, and they are in the more rural and non-coastal areas. And as I said before, the permits were renewed in 2018 and will be expiring at the end of 2022. So we also have the third MS4 permit for the public complexes. Right now we have 69 public complexes that we permit, and they are mostly public colleges, universities, hospitals, prisons, and this permit renewal became effective January 1st of 2019. They were a year off from the Tier A and Tier B permits. We also have the fourth MS4 permit for the highway agencies that we renewed. There are 33 highway agencies regulated under this permit. It includes the Parkway, the Turnpike, the Expressway, county DOTs, bridge commissions, and that permit renewal was effective January 1st of 2020. Here's a quick map of the regulated MS4 areas across the country. And you can see it's certainly more concentrated on the east, and in New Jersey in particular, we do regulate almost every town in New Jersey under the MS4 program, and the coverage covers almost the entire state. So we have done and plan to do extensive outreach for the MS4 permit renewals. And just as a FYI, we did have 2 lawsuits filed against us over the last renewal by the environmental, 2 sets of environmental groups. And the main complaint was that the permits didn't go quite far enough in protecting water quality and didn't comply with federal requirements or certain state rules. However, in March 2020, the appellate division, which is where the appeal of the permit landed, affirmed DEP's final permit that the permit itself did comply with federal and state requirements. However, we do expect that under the next permit renewal that we're working on, that we will be faced with those same challenges to make sure that the permit does address water quality, and that, as the MS4 program is supposed to be an iterative process, that there will be some additional requirements as we, continue to move further and further into protecting water quality under the Clean Water Act. So every permit, every one of the MS4 permits that we have issued requires public education and outreach. The Tier A and B have to achieve 12 activity points, and with certain specifications in the permit, as well as the public complex, and the highway agency only has to achieve 5 points under their particular set of public outreach. So under the post-construction runoff controls, which was mostly what we were covering over the last 3 days and 4 days, we have local review by all the towns in New Jersey and the other MS4 permittees to ensure consistency with the New Jersey stormwater rules for green infrastructure, water quantity, water quality, and groundwater recharge. We asked the permittees to utilize Attachment D checklist to ensure compliance with the design and performance requirements under stormwater rules and submit that with the annual report. Any development that meets the definition of major development in the local SCO must be reviewed at the local level to ensure compliance with these standards. These permit requirements are their permit requirements in the MS4 permits to conduct the review, maintain the records, and certify compliance with those requirements on an annual basis in the annual report. And then to assist with the permit requirement, we provide updates to the BMP manual. We post various training videos and present this free engineer training, what we have done, I think, in the past couple of years, twice per year. So also here is a snip of Attachment D that has been included in the Tier A, B, and Public Complex permit. The highway agency has a similar table, and these need to be completed and submitted with each major development that's reviewed and approved. The sheet has general information about the BMPs being used and information on each basin, if it's a basin. And if you are conducting a review for one of these permittees, this sheet must be completed. Much of the information could be completed by the applicant or may be completed by the reviewer. Either way, if it's a major development, this form needs to be completed and submitted. So here we have the section of the permit that includes community-wide ordinances and measures under pollution prevention and good housekeeping. Basically, retained the 6 existing local ordinances, catch basin inspection and cleaning, which we want to make sure occurs at least once every 5 years. And that based on problems that are observed, that if the frequency of inspection and cleaning needs to be increased, that the town or the MS4 permittees do that. The permits also have somewhat different street sweeping requirements. The Tier A and B were required to sweep commercial areas. The permit was very detailed about what areas needed to be swept. The public complex and the highway agency started to sort of deviate from that and require more areas to be swept. I expect that those requirements will be enhanced in the renewal of the Tier A and B as well. The towns, the MS4 permittees are required to maintain records and certify those requirements annually. And it is up to the towns or the permittee to prioritize what they're cleaning and inspections based on problems that they've noted. Okay, along the lines of pollution prevention and good housekeeping, the MS4 permits also contain specific requirements related to municipal maintenance yards and other ancillary operations that we've noted in attachment E of the MS4 permits. They include best management practices that apply to items normally found in a average municipal maintenance yard, including how to deal with aggregate materials, debris storage, street sweeping, etc., that may be stored in the yard, including wood waste management. The permits now address vehicle wash water if that water is retained in an underground storage tank on the site. The permit also requires employee training. The training should be specific to the employee's job title and duties. It should occur within 3 months of commencement of those duties and also be scheduled based on the permit requirement every 1 or 2 years. Different trainings in the permit are specified to be once per year, once every 2 years. It's not an option to do it once every 1 or 2 years at your discretion. The records of the employees being trained need to be kept, and the permittees need to certify annually.
Okay.
And DEP materials, training materials are posted on our website. So the permit requirements also require that the review engineers, for instance, do attend this class that we are holding now once every 5 years, and that the participants register and DEP maintains records of those who have taken the class. We do offer the class, as you know, free, and we are trying to offer it at least twice per year. We don't have a time, just for your information, we don't have a date for the next course if you know of anybody that's interested, but we normally do a spring and a fall session. So for the for the Tier A and Tier B permits, there are training requirements for board and council members. This training is on a higher level and intended to familiarize those members with the permit and the requirements therein. There is a free online training that is also broken into 3 15-minute modules. There was a problem, I don't know if anybody encountered this. The training is called Asking the Right Questions initially, and then there are requirements in the permit for those board and council members to take any of the other trainings that we have offered online. There were some problems with the transition. The course was created in one Adobe format, which was no longer supported pretty much as soon as we issued the permit, unfortunately, but we hope that we have corrected that and the link on our website now works, hopefully for everybody. There is a requirement also to do outfall pipe mapping in the permit. And to inspect those outfall pipes at the areas around the outfall pipes for stream scouring. They must be inspected at least once every 5 years, and repairs must be prioritized and scheduled. The outfall pipe map, there was a requirement to have an outfall pipe map in previous permits. This last renewal permit requested a copy of the map to be submitted and also to have the map converted to an electronic version by 12/21/20. There are a number of towns that we've received, but there is a larger number of towns whose electronic maps we have not received. I'm sorry, if you can remember back to the first module, last Tuesday, Tim Ebersberger did a presentation on the mapping, and that mapping would suffice to in compliance with this requirement in the permit. And if you have any questions about how to go forward with that, please reach out. The link is here on the slide, or you could reach out to Tim or myself. So the permit also requires, along with the mapping, that there be an illicit discharge and scouring, an illicit discharge and elimination program to develop, update, implement, and enforce an ongoing illicit discharge detection and elimination program. Again, this inspection should be occurring at least once every 5 years, but annually for public complex facilities. The permittees would be required to document the information that they found. The mapping app can also be used in noting the location. But in this case, for illicit discharges, there is a form on our website that we actually just updated, maybe within the last month, that the permittees are required to use to document and notify the department of any illicit discharge investigations that they have conducted. And that form is to be submitted with the annual report. There are other maintenance requirements, and this is a very big issue that we have found as we've gone through and done the audits at a couple dozen locations around the state. The lack of maintenance at many stormwater facilities is contributing to their poor functioning. Publicly owned stormwater facilities must be maintained by the permittee. If that is town, the town is also required to ensure that privately owned BMPs are being properly maintained and that some sort of certification or proof is provided to them on an annual basis. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I'll see how far I can get. So, since originally issued in 2004, these MS4 permits have always included maintenance requirements, but there are some actions the DEP has taken to help with the maintenance requirements. In particular, we've created the mapping application and offering the licenses for free. To the permittees so that you can map the location of your BMPs and include information about their current status in the app as well. There's an extensive new O&M checklist and guidance posted online. There is also a land use general permit for basin maintenance. There is a letter from the department to support municipalities gaining information and access to private stormwater facilities as well. Another requirement in the latest renewal of the MS4 permits is the incorporation of Tmdl information into the stormwater pollution prevention plans. It requires that all of the permittees, all of the MS4 permittees identify the TMDLs that have been adopted on waterways within or bordering their properties. The requirement for the highway agencies is slightly different. Since some of the highways traverse the entire state, they may end up with an awful lot of TMDLs that they have to deal with. So those requirements were a little bit more tailored. We also asked in the permit that permittees prioritize stormwater facility maintenance and repairs in those TMDL areas. They update their stormwater pollution prevention plan annually to include any new TMDLs. We have a Tmdl Lookup tool posted online, which we will also be enhancing in the near future to assist the towns in finding which TMDLs apply to their area. And this information should also be, as I said, also be included in the stormwater pollution prevention plan that is posted online. So this is an example page from the permits showing the measurable goals within the permit. Each permit includes this type of table, and it's a good summary of the permit conditions and requirements and is found in Appendix A of the MS4 permits. Here again is just a quick reference to the mapping requirements that are in the permits. And I think Tim covered this topic pretty well, as I mentioned before. The mapping app includes a bunch of drop-down menus for the type of BMP and the location. You can use a smartphone, tablet, GIS. We have guidance that we're working on. Tim is available for all kinds of training and assistance. There are many feature classes that we have, and we'll be hopefully adding more as time goes by. Here's a quick look at what the Tmdl Lookup tool looks like right now. I'm hoping that, I don't know, Tim, if I'm right, but sometime by the summer, maybe we will have the updated lookup tool, which will operate, it'll operate almost the same, but the view will be different, and it will show you a little, the information in a little bit of a different format. And hopefully, if we can get it, we'll also be able to share with you a map showing the coverage areas. So here's just here's just a quick look at what one of the TMDL, when you click on the TMDL Lookup tool, you'll get a list of the TMDLs that are applicable in your area. There are links on that document where you can click and go to look and review and get to the actual TMDL document that was adopted. They're long, and sometimes it's kind of hard to find the information that you're looking for, but it's all in there. And I'll have to say that personally, I use the Control F feature to look for different topics that I'm looking for, because sometimes there are over 100 pages and it's sometimes a little bit hard to find the particular piece of information that you're looking for. So we have updated the BMP manual, as we mentioned earlier in the course, chapters 9, 10, and 11 in particular. Chapter 9 has the BMPs listed in Table 5.1. In the new rules, Chapter 10 has the BMPs from Table 5.2, and Chapter 11 has the BMPs from 5.3. We also had posted some earlier updates on other BMP chapters. I believe it was 5 and 12, if I'm not mistaken, and we are working on the other chapters that have not been updated yet. So these are some of the other pages that we've worked on that are available on the website. As I said, we're working on some other chapters right now. We've gotten pretty far through chapter 3. We're working on 4. I think 6 is also in the process, and we have all of them on our plate to finish. So there are some stormwater maintenance guidance documents on the website that are available for permittees to use. For stormwater training, we have our live training course that we're doing. We have various training material on the website, all available at njstormwater.org/training. We have a page on our website dedicated to manufactured treatment devices that Dick McGee spoke about, I believe, last Thursday. So you can look for MTDs that have been certified by the state. You can get various information about when they were certified. I'm sorry. I thought I heard somebody say something.
So as far
Yeah.
Do you want me, your voice sounds pretty sore. Do you want me to take over or do you want to continue? I'm sorry for the interruption.
I only have 6 more slides, so if it's okay, I'll just finish up, but jump in if I'm missing anything.
No, you're doing great.
So regarding the MS4 audit program that we had been working on for the last 4 or so years, with the beginning of the pandemic, all of our field visits were cut off and we began working from home. We tried to finish up audit letters, but we were not conducting any more on-site audits. In the past year, we pretty much switched over to, I'm going to say not an audit, but a compliance check on our permittees to make sure that all of the things that were required to be submitted or posted or whatever that had a due date in the permit had been done. We were checking through the SPPPs that were posted. We've been checking through the annual reports that were submitted. We've been also catching up on a number of other things. So it's kind of not a site-specific audit, but trying to address those compliance issues that we could while we were not allowed to be out in the field. Right now, we have a number of things on our plate and we're still not going out and doing audits, and so I don't have any updates to share, but we are going to continue reviewing compliance, at least from the safety of the computer in the meantime. So there isn't much here, but basically we were conducting the audits to try to assist the MS4 permittees into coming into compliance with the permit requirements, to help them understand what the different requirements meant, help clear up any confusion about things that were in the permit. So we're still here for that. If anybody, from any town or other MS4 permittee in the state has questions, we are reaching out and sending emails. All of the staff are reviewing their counties, the MS4 permittees in their counties. So we did have a certain, I guess, list of thoughts that we were using to go through the audit process, but we did, like I said, we did try then to give 30 days notice. We were asking for project plans, which I think we got to that step for the audits we were going to conduct last year, and we received some projects, but then we had a lot of other priorities, and we weren't conducting the audits, so we put that off. We are going to start to look at the projects that were submitted and try to follow up on that in the meantime, especially for the ones that we did receive based on our request. Obviously, the on-site discussion and review wasn't happening, and it was basically an overall review of permit compliance. So moving forward, we're working on the renewal. We will be doing outreach activities as we get to a point where we have material to share. And again, the Tim is always available for the mapping app training and to answer questions. And we will be scheduling another stormwater management review course in the fall, although the exact timing has not been decided yet. So we have a bunch of links that we provide here if you have any questions. We will be updating some of our links, I assume, in the near future. I think, like I said, in the beginning of Tuesday, that we did go through a bit of a reorganization. We are no longer in the Division of Water Quality, so some of our websites may be changing, but we don't have a definite date for when that will be moved. Hopefully, you may get new links in the future, but the old links should just redirect you to the new location of the same information. But if you ever encounter any problems, please feel free to just reach out. If you have any questions please feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information. And there was one bit of information that I thought was in the presentation, but I don't think I saw it. I don't think I skipped a slide, but we also posted a new website for stormwater utilities. It is available on our Bureau Stormwater webpage. We can certainly post that link in the chat if somebody can go grab it and put it in there. If anybody, if any of your towns are interested or other entities are interested in forming a utility, we've posted our guidance live on the webpage in March, and we are we have a email mailbox where we are more than happy to take questions. You can also reach out to me in particular, and if anybody has any other questions about the stormwater utilities that isn't answered on that webpage, please feel free to reach out. So we will be emailing the course survey within the next 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. They need to be completed and sent back in order to get your certificate of completion for the course. Please provide a copy of your certificate of completion to your stormwater program coordinator, because they are supposed to be keeping track of everybody's training. This course is required to be completed for every 5 years for people that are reviewing and approving major developments. And all of these materials should be available as handouts on our webpage at njstormwater.org under training. So I think that pretty much concludes our presentation. And unfortunately, I have one screen, so I have not been able to keep up with any questions in the chat. Are there any that we need to address?
I just posted the link to the stormwater utility page in the chat. And I am looking to see if there are other questions. Mainly they are technical. And Cheney has been doing a great job of keeping up with them. I think we have 1 or 2 questions that we didn't get to earlier. I think that was about groundwater mounding, if I remember correctly. But
oh, I just see a new one. Has NJDEP audited NJDOT?
yes.
Our staff did not do any compliance audits, but enforcement does inspect them. And I believe we did have one county DOT that was audited by EPA, if I'm not mistaken. But this was 2020 was going to be the year where we were going to start to audit the non-municipal MS4s. And unfortunately, those plans were sort of taken off course. So once we get back on track, we decide how the audit program is going to proceed. Right now, I have to say we are pretty busy with working on the renewal and other compliance evaluations, but NJDOT is also one of the permittees that we are overseeing for compliance in the, not really the audit process that we were doing, but the current compliance reviews that we are doing. I don't know if that really answers the question, but
Okay. Was there anybody whose question we did not answer? Feel free to raise your hand. Okay. Well, you all have such nice things to say. Thank you. Let's see if we put in the current time Mintnesh, how many calc credits do we get altogether for the program? Just as a test case.
Let me give you 1 second.
Okay.
It should be about 12.4.
Okay, so that's 1.24 CEUs for those of you requiring credits. Let's see. So I don't see any hands raised. All right. So the quiz reviews themselves aren't posted because we use them for the next session, but they are based on the handout materials as well as what the speakers actually say during the presentation. And we're hoping that you will use your handouts as reference material as you go forward. And you can always email us if you need further clarification on that. Wow, so many nice comments from people. Yeah, there wasn't a quiz today on this presentation, and we close them after the time when you take them live, because well, we've had issues in the past where people who didn't take the class took the quiz. I guess they forwarded the link or something crazy like that. So it's more of a control issue with that. Everyone who is missed a part, we've been sending them a quiz to take and then reviewing their answers individually so that we can use it as an educational experience as well as see how good a job we are doing in conveying the information. So let's see, I'm going to run one more attendance report. And unless there aren't any other questions, I would say you can exit the training, but we'll stick around for a bit. I won't close out the room until 4 o'clock. And I'll ask Chang'e. Oh, I think, let's see, do we have a question? Hold on. Do I have a hand? No, we don't. Oh, Ted has a question. Can you, do you want to type it in, Ted, or do you want to unmute yourself and ask it?
It's Ted. I'm not very good at typing, so
Okay.
I typed the question up in the chat a little bit ago. I have a facility that's been around since the 1960s, and it had had gravel driveways, gravel walking paths. It was an old camp, and the applicant just went and paved it all. Does that count as new impervious coverage, or is that something that's kind of grandfathered in?
Gravel, existing gravel can be considered pervious or impervious surface. It depending on how the gravel being compacted over the years. We in the FAQ we said that the new gravel area is not considered impervious surface, but for existing gravel area, it's really depending on how the gravel, the permeability of the gravel area. So, but if the gravel area, after you check and you decide it's permeable, then you pave over it with asphalt pavement. Then there is a new impervious surface over the gravel area. And also if that paved area is going to be used for motor vehicle use, then the paved area will become regulated motor vehicle service. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Ching-Li. Most of it's been around since the 1960s, so it's all been driven on, so it'd be very compacted. Would a double ring infiltrometer be okay to prove the pervious or impervious nature of that?
We don't have a definite test for that, but as I know that the land use program that has been using some kind of like just walk through and poke around to see how, and pouring water to see how it goes through the gravel area. But don't quote my word, because you may have to check with the land use how they did it in the field. But it just, if you think that the permatometer that can represent the permeability of the area, you can try, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ting Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, when we do send out the evaluations, suggestions will be, there's like one question at the end, what can we do to make it better? Let us know. If there's something that wasn't covered that you would like to see. These are all things that we can use and learn from, and continue to make improvements upon. So let's see, we have more messages. We have my chat function is malfunctioning. Let's see, what do we have? Okay. All right. Ted pasted into the chat old FAQ 10.3. Oh, no, sorry. Changi pasted that in for Ted's edification. Okay, that should help. My apologies. All right, then it's 3:47. Unless there are any further questions, we'll close out the training. But we'll keep the room open in case there was something else that you wanted, if you needed something. All right, thank you, everyone. And I hopefully will be seeing you sometime soon. Thank you again.